Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Comic Source Podcast. I'm your host, Jace. This is a special spotlight episode on an upcoming Marvel title. Maybe you heard the news. I have the writer of that title joining me, Jim Zub. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't think. We've talked a few times at conventions, quick interviews here or there, but I don't think we've had you on for like a deep dive.
Yeah, like a full-blown episode?
Yeah, not
Nice.
since maybe for your Image series, Wayward.
Oh man, that's
Way
like probably
back.
2014,
Yeah,
2015.
I was gonna
Yeah, that's
say
a
like
while back.
yeah, like 5 or 6 years. It may even be longer than
Longer.
that.
Wow.
But yeah, excited to talk about Thunderbolts.
Awesome.
I reached out at the end of last year. You mentioned you had some announcements. I wouldn't have
Yeah,
dreamed.
you wanted to do a new episode. You were like, "It'd be great to talk to you." And I said, "Just hold off a little bit. I got some announcements coming up." I feel I wanted to talk about those and I didn't want to have to hold the secret. So it's always nicer once the thing's announced and I
Oh
can
yeah,
say,
yeah. And then when it dropped, to see that
yeah,
was Thunderbolts, I was really excited. Right. So in the
thanks.
interest of full disclosure, everybody, so Jim did a Thunderbolts. John Malin was the artist.
Yeah.
Winter Soldier was the lead, and there was plenty of villains.
2016, 2017. Yeah,
Yeah,
12 issues. Yeah, yeah.
but you still had plenty more ideas to go, right? Like I remember you pitched another Thunderbolts like later
Yes.
that never.
So I wanted to do like the Thunderbolt series I did in 2016, 2017, those 12 issues, they led into Secret Empire. And there was the plot line with Kobik, the cosmic cube girl and
Right.
all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. Bucky trying to protect her and make sure that the government didn't get a hold of her, and then that Cap didn't get a hold of her and all this kind of stuff. And that was sort of the through line of a lot of that story. And I was exploring other aspects of the classic kind of Thunderbolts lineup and Zemo's return and all that kind of thing. But then everything had to careen into the Secret Empire event. My hope was that we were going to spring out of Secret Empire and keep the story going. Like we were going to go off in other directions with it. And that's what I pitched. But, these things happen. I wasn't able to continue it at that time. And it's one of those things where you do a run on a book, you do the best you can with it. I'm really proud of what we put together there. And then it moves on and other people will pick up the baton and what may have you. It's an unusual thing to get another chance to do a book like this. And now this take I'm doing, for 2022 is very different because things have moved on and characters have moved on and concepts and stories are always moving forward. But, as I've been sort of joking around, I said it's like lightning strikes twice, so
Yeah.
Thunderbolts are back and I get to give this one a shot with something really different. And it's fun. It's a really cool book to be able to work on. The cast of characters I have is completely different. And the story that we're trying to tell, I'm really pumped for. So
Yeah, so it seems like you have an affinity for the concept of Thunderbolts, and obviously when it first came out with Busiek and Begley and those guys, it really was leaning into this idea of let's pull the rug out from under the readers when they find out
yeah.
everybody's a bad guy. You had a little bit of that aspect in your previous run, like we mentioned. Winter Soldier heading it up, but even he can be somewhat of an anti-hero at times.
Sure.
But then this one, I've heard you describe this one as Ted Lasso meets superhero. That's a
Yeah.
big
It's a big swing, right? Now,
yeah.
Thunderbolts have gone through a ton of different iterations. Like there's the classic kind of Busiek run where you've got the Masters of Evil in disguise at the start. But then Hawkeye was the second leader of the team, and that was while Busiek was still writing it. Hawkeye ends up coming in and tries to essentially take, like the team had rebelled against Zemo's pure villainy,
Hmm.
and they were actually trying to figure themselves out as heroes. And Hawkeye was like, well, I used to be a criminal. I know what this is like. I want to help you guys get there. And he sort of holds their feet to the fire to try and be, better. And that went on for quite a while. And then the book went through other iterations, right? Like you had the Warren Ellis version that was like the, Osborn's kind of team that eventually became Dark Avengers. You have Luke Cage came on, I know when Jake Parker was writing, and Luke Cage was the leader of the team, and he was trying to take these prisoners and form them into some sort of a superheroic team. You've got the Thunderbolts Ross version that Daniel Way did, where you've got Punisher and Deadpool and like all kinds of different characters like that in the mix. And so it's really been this sort of mutable concept over the years. Like there's been different versions of Thunderbolts, and what that name means and what that team cohesion is all about. But there's always something that takes it out of a classic superheroic mold. Like, even if they're either villains trying to be heroes, or they're anti-heroes, or they're breaking the rules in some way, shape, or form. And that's kind of always been, I think, at the heart of the Thunderbolts concept. Is it's not your, pure goodness kind of superheroes doing things for altruistic reasons, and there's always more going on under the surface than you expect. And so I'm keeping that in mind, but obviously I don't want to spoil in what sort of ways. Ostensibly, when you look at the surface of this thing, you go, well, these are all heroic characters, right? Like, obviously, Monica Rambeau and America Chavez and Clint Barton and Victor Alvarez. These are all characters who have been on, Avengers teams, and they've been on heroic teams, and they've done the right things for the right reasons. And so on its surface, it seems like it's kind of the antithesis of the Thunderbolts concept. And all I can say is that there's an element, that we're keeping close to our chest on this. Not to say that they're not trying to be heroes, but sort of the tagline that I think Tom and the team came up with was this idea of redeeming lightning, or redeeming justice, or whatever you want to call it, like justice like lightning, which is that kind of subtitle they use on the series. And so we're sort of like redeeming the lightning or whatever. And the name Thunderbolts in its current iteration is actually in Devil's Reign. There's a team of Thunderbolts that Wilson Fisk is controlling. Mm-hmm. And it's these pure villains, pure criminals who have been deputized because Wilson Fisk is the mayor of New York and he's running things. And these guys are running around with a badge and essentially just cracking heads and causing trouble under Wilson Fisk's, command, but also going off on their own chaotic missions and doing their own crap when they're not being watched. And so the idea I've got, and what I can reveal so far, is that Hawkeye, being a previous leader of the Thunderbolts, and Luke Cage, being a previous leader of the Thunderbolts, they don't want Wilson Fisk's pure kind of criminal version of the Thunderbolts to be the last word on that team. They don't want that to be the legacy that this thing carries forward. And they've got skin in the game in the sense of they want this to be something more because they both feel connected to it from the past. And so Clint has been kind of recruited to take this team and, for lack of a better term, turn it straight, like make the brand, heroic again in some way, shape, or form. Can he do that? Does he have the juice? Is there other things that are going to make it hard? Oh yeah. Like, I've got all kinds of fun, stuff to throw in his way. And the Ted Lasso kind of comparison that I used was very much that kind of character-centered, upbeat, fun, but kind of emotional quality to it. Like, Clint has been a leader of, multiple teams in the past, but he's carrying a lot of baggage, as well. And he may not be the best person for the job, but he's got to step into this role and make the most of it. And that feels like a little Ted Lasso-y to me. You've got this guy, out of his depth a little bit, or struggling with all these kind of internal issues, who's trying to be the leader that he wants to be, or trying to be better and motivate other people, even though he's dragging his own kind of chains behind him. And that's very much in that kind of mold. And all the characters have got a lot of richness and kind of depth in that way. Monica's someone else who has not always gotten her due and, needs to sort of find her footing. And now this is an opportunity potentially to do so, but it's not going to be easy, and I'm having a lot of fun, putting together this crew and the interactions that they have.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, when you think about what you're saying with baggage or chains, or, the throughput of all these different iterations of the Thunderbolts over the years being that they're somewhat flawed, and their flaws are closer to the surface, right?
Yes.
Like when you think about the Avengers, it's the best of the best,
right?
The Defenders were always the weird, quirky magic team or whatever, but the Avengers were always the best of the best, and they're at the center of the Marvel universe and, billion-dollar movies and whatnot. But there's this idea of the Thunderbolts and those flaws so close to the surface. In a way, it's the most Marvel of all superhero teams, because when you really talk about starting the Marvel age with Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and the Hulk, it was Stan and Jack leaning into the flaws, right? That's what
a feat of clay, like characters that really struggle to find themselves and find their footing. And that's the characters we love. The reason why we see ourselves in the Marvel universe is because we're all Peter Parker, we're all Ben Grimm, we're all, Johnny Storm and these characters who wear their heart on their sleeves and make mistakes and aren't perfect paragons. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And I love those characters the most. I love the street level characters. I love the supernatural characters, and I kind of love the ones that mess up, you know, and that ability for us to see ourselves in them is really valuable. And when I make new characters for the Marvel Universe, I always try and think of that, like, what is the hook? What is the emotional hook? What is the mental hook? What is, just as much as what is their ability and what is their cool visual, what is holding them back? Like, what is inside that makes them, you know, struggle? And I'm really thankful that I've had the ability to create some new characters that have some of those qualities to them, and try and inject those things that I think are so valuable to make not just a superhero, but a Marvel superhero. And in Thunderbolts, we're making a couple new characters as well. So there's one character there in the background of the variant. You can see him there, and he's on the lineup. He's this sort of cyber soldier, very much in a 90s mold, and that's by design, like a real throwback kind of character. He's got these cybernetics and weaponry, you know, in the way that all those 90s characters seem to. And his name is literally Guts and Glory.
Guts and Glory, yeah.
Right. And it's sort of ridiculous. And like the response I got to that was like an equal amount of eye rolling, and the other half was, this is amazing, right? Just on the name. And that's the reaction I want. If you think it's corny, you're right. If you think it's amazing, you're also right. Like it is ridiculous on its face. And the character is your classic kind of mystery man, like, what's his past? What's his capability? It's all classified. You're not allowed to know. It's, you know, all been sealed military records or whatever. And we're playing up those kind of traits that you saw in those 90s characters, the cooler than cool, the kind of mystery men, and you know, figuring out what their past was afterwards. Except I know what his past is and how he fits together, and what his feet of clay are, and why he's a valuable, you know, kind of Marvel superhero. But I'm going to just tease that stuff out, you know, in the story, and really excited to do so.
So did you get to choose the whole lineup? Was that all on you?
It was a mixture. I mean, I chose them all. Like, I did end up picking each character, but we sort of went back and forth through multiple iterations. So what had happened was there's a pretty constant dialogue that's going with my editors about, you know, different possible projects and things like that. I don't know that it's absolutely formalized, but there's kind of three different, I guess you could call it, tiers of writers at Marvel. Again, I don't think they put a badge on it or something, but you'll sort of notice there's the people who are exclusive, right? So they're the people that do all the creative summits, and they're doing the long-term building and planning and stuff like that. Then you've got another kind of group of writers that I kind of fall into, where I do a lot of regular work for Marvel in the Marvel Universe. And so I'm looped in on a bunch of meetings or things that are happening, but I'm not necessarily architecting out big events and stuff like that. But I am getting, for example, like advanced PDFs of books before they go to print, and knowing what some of the big story beats are. So it's like, oh, okay, these are the big events, and here's how it's going to tie in. What are the things spinning out of that? Where's a good fit for some of these things? And occasionally throw ideas into the mix. And then you've got just other freelance writers that are going to hire, usually for very specific projects, a miniseries or a one-shot or a short story or an anthology or whatever. And so this was something where I had talked about other characters, and I had pitched a concept to CB Cebulski. And it was one of those classic things of, hey, some of these characters are already kind of spoken for. We've got other plans. But you know what? We were thinking that it would be good to spin out of Devil's Reign, you know, Chip's event that he's been doing with Daredevil and a bunch of these street level characters. We would love to see a team kind of spin out of this. And it might be the Thunderbolts, or it might be something else. We don't know yet. We've got these kind of parameters. Is this something you're interested in? And I thought, well, they won't let me do the Thunderbolts again, but I'll try and pitch an idea at them. So I pitched a lineup of characters, and then it was a back and forth kind of process. And one of the precepts we came up with was that this team was going to be very centered around New York City. And so how many characters could we have that were geographically based there? And so it was something where I said, okay, let's literally go down a list. And that's where someone like, you know, Power Man, the young Power Man, Victor Alvarez, was in the mix. And I thought, oh, he'd be a really good fit Luke Cage isn't on this team, but he could recommend, Victor or something like that. And then that America Chavez Made in America miniseries came out, and she moved from the West Coast to New York at the end of that series, or over the course of that series. And I was like, oh, she's New York based now. Oh, that'd be cool. Maybe getting, America in here would be great. And so you just sort of, kind of assembling this group and seeing what the ingredients are, what roles do they fill, and then what kind of story plot elements can you bring into it. And I've built a bit of a reputation for writing teams and team dynamics. And that wasn't something I kind of planned. It just, the kinds of projects I've been offered at Marvel and the response we've gotten from readers has been like, I did Thunderbolts, and then I did Uncanny Avengers. Then I did that Avengers event, No Surrender, with Mark and Al. I did Champions. Like, it's just been team book after team book after team book. Like, it's pretty constant. I don't think I've written any solo characters at Marvel at all. And so people just really like the way I'm doing the team dynamic stuff. And so, it fits my sensibilities as well. I like the variety. I like the way the interactivity of the characters. Just, it feels like just checking in and moving everyone's plots forward. You've just got a lot of cool stuff that you can do in any particular issue. And so it was a thing where I just put together a lineup, and I kind of said, okay, these are the different pieces and how they fit emotionally. This is where we can go with it. And Clint is sort of at the center of all these things, that Hawkeye's, his strengths, but also his flaws are going to define a lot of how this story plays out in fun and, I think, unexpected ways.
Yeah, he's in such a different place. Like, right, when I think of Hawkeye leading a team, I think back to kind of the 80s, kind of
West Coast Avengers.
The wackos and how he was all gung-ho and everything was black and white.
It's funny you mention that. So at the very start of issue 1 of Thunderbolts, this first issue that's going to be coming out in May, Clint is kind of going through a little bit of a, internal, he's, got some doubts and whatever, and he really wants to get back to that place. So he gets on the phone with Simon Williams, Wonder Man, and he's like, hey, we should get the gang back together. Like, let's get the West Coast Avengers going. And that's sort of his mindset. And then Simon's busy with other things and other people are doing other stuff. And all of a sudden he gets this offer to bring the Thunderbolts back into play. And it's sort of like, well, it's not the West Coast Avengers, but you know what? This ain't all bad. Right. And so it's this kind of thing where he's pining for this time in his life where he felt like things were simple, where things were black and white, where bad guys were bad and good guys were good, and let's do this thing. And so he's trying to recapture that magic, but you can't go back. That's one of the bits of story. And we played with that in the other Thunderbolts run, where we got the original lineup together, even Songbird and everyone else back on the team. And there was a lot of this sort of feeling of, okay, the team's all here, we're back. And then there was a lot of this kind of yearning of, but we're not the same people and we don't have the same goals and we're not all moving in the same direction anymore. And, I think that's there's a truism there. We all want to recapture that magic, or we all want that idealized version of ourselves at a particular age or in a particular time. At the time, we didn't even know how much precious it was. And now all we want to do is try and get back there. But what you really need to do is push forward and figure out who you are in the here and now.
Yeah, and again, it sounds like you're pulling in a lot of the classic stuff. Because when I was thinking, I knew I was going to talk to you, and I was thinking today on my drive into work to the day job this morning, I was like, man, I kind of want to ask Jim about like I was saying about pulling the rug out from it, because it's such a classic Thunderbolts thing. But then I'm like, but we don't want to spoil anything, and you already addressed it.
And I'll be honest with you, you can't recapture that magic either. Like, you can't pull. I'll just tell you, these guys can't all be villains in disguise. That's not going to work. That's
been done.
Right. And even if I did it, everyone would go, oh, you're just ripping off Busiek. Or, we've been there, done that. Like, I understand that desire. You're like, it's Thunderbolts, we got to have villains in disguise. You're like, no, what you got to do is you got to keep people on their toes.
Right. You got to have a twist.
lot of different ways to do that, And when we did the book in 2016, it was all Kobik was sort of this monkey's paw. And so we could twist and turn characters and motivations and mess with their minds. And that's not the Masters of Evil reveal, but it allowed us to sort of pull the rug out in multiple times during the book. Right. In different ways. And that's, I think, should be the core of it. Thunderbolts is not about a surprise gimmick. it's about, people struggling, against their, like you said, the flaws right on the surface, right?
Yeah.
Does the book usually have a lot of cool twisty turny? Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something valuable and worth doing. And so I've peppered in a couple little fun things, and we've got some cool reveals that are going to come, but it's not Busick and Bagley, because you can't do that again,
Right.
And so, yeah.
Yeah. But speaking of Bagley and incredible art, talk a little bit about your collaborator on this series,
Oh
because you
my
have a
gosh,
fantastic artist.
Shawn Isaac. So we've got a long history of collaboration, which I'm so incredibly proud of. I didn't even know this. I think one of his first professional gigs ever was doing this fantasy book Pathfinder for Dynamite. And he was one of the artists I worked with over there. I really liked his stuff. He was super consistent and professional. And so when the time came and I was doing Thunderbolts in 2016, John Malin did the lion's share of the issues. He did 10 out of the 12. But just on that natural schedule, like most artists, he wasn't quite monthly. And so over the course of a story arc, you're not like, this was all planned. You're going to have fill-in issues. You need another artist. And Shawn was the person that I recommended. And so he came in and drew 2 issues of the series.
Was that his first Marvel work?
That was his first Marvel work.
Oh, wow.
So it was my first, I had done some other Marvel stuff, but Thunderbolts was my first like Marvel Universe superhero stuff. And that was Shawn's first gig, period. And it went over so well. They were so happy with it. They immediately wanted to roll him over onto other stuff. And so his next gig, I think I had Kim Jacinto for like 2 issues on Uncanny Avengers, which I took over from Jerry Dugan. And then Shawn stepped on there, and Shawn carried that through till the end of the run. And then Shawn and I both stepped over onto Avengers No Surrender. He did a couple issues there. Then we did Champions together. He did the first handful of issues of Champions before he stepped over to work with Dan on Fantastic Four. And so his first 3 projects were all with me. And then Dan stole them, but quite validly. And I was honestly convinced, I was like, I'm never going to work with Shawn again, just because he was going to be doing A-list kind of high profile stuff with these exclusive writers. And kind of lucked out. He did a bunch on FF, and then he did Fantastic Four Life Story.
Was fantastic.
Which was great.
No pun intended.
Yeah, such a good book. And just the timing was perfect. I saw him on social media talking that he had just wrapped up his last page of Life Story. And I was like, oh, we're casting for Thunderbolts. I wonder if I could scoop him for it. And so I contacted Tom Brevoort, my editor, and I was like, I'd love to get Shawn on this book. I love his design sense, so he can design the new characters. His storytelling's immaculate, and we've got such good synergy. And he said, I don't know, like Shawn just got off this intense project. I don't know if he wants to do another team book. That's a lot of work. And I was like, well, can we ask him? And he's like, well, sure, you're free to ask him. And I know that Shawn loves Hawkeye. I know that that's one of his favorite characters in the Marvel Universe. So I kind of had the hook. I just like contacted Shawn and said, dude, Clint Barton, like he's mine. Let's do it. And that was it. That's all I needed to say. I was like, Clint Barton, I got all these other great characters, Monica, all these other characters you really like. And he was like, all right, I'll dig deep, drink more coffee, and we'll do this thing. And so and to make it even crazier, the first issue is 30 pages.
Oh my God.
So and that was just really nice. Like, I laid out the story for Tom, what we want to do. And the first issue is dense. There's a lot there. And I want to make the biggest splash possible. I want it to feel really classic kind of superheroes. There's a lot of great character stuff. There's big action. Every character gets a cool moment and gets to show off their powers. So if this is the first book you've read with some of these characters, you know exactly what they can do. It was just, there was a lot there. And Tom goes, yeah, how about 30 pages for that first issue? And I was like, oh, thank God, because otherwise it's going to be just like breakneck. And so I wrote that first script, and I'm really, really proud of it. Like, I can say it's probably one of the best scripts I've written at Marvel. Like, it all feels it has the qualities of the books that I loved growing up. Like, it's got humor, it's got heart, it's got big action. I just wanted it to feel like big bombastic superhero stuff, and Shawn's just going to the wall with it. So, if people don't like that first issue, I don't know what to tell them. Like, that is the book I want to do, and that is the heart I want to put into it. And I hope that people really, really love it as much as we do. So
yeah, and even the characters I've seen before, I haven't seen these specific looks. So
Sure.
Sean gave everybody at least
Yeah, he did
somewhat of a different.
totally new costume designs, and that's very much in Sean's way. Like when we did Uncanny Avengers, he started immediately tweaking character designs and just coming up with costumes. I think he did a new costume for Quicksilver and a couple other characters that he really likes, and he just wanted to sort of put his own spin on it. And I didn't think he'd have time again because he had to pretty much draw as soon as he finished Life Story. He was jumping on this, and costume design can take some time. And I was like, just do the new characters, just do the 2 new characters. And he was like, no, I want Clint's new costume and I want to do this, I want to do that. And I was like, all right, man, that's a real joy for him. I think the thing that he loves most is designing it, but then other people, if they use those designs, like David Nakayama does this cover art that looks so cool. And it's like a big point of pride to Sean. Oh yeah, that's my costume that they're doing now, And if you do it well, then that becomes the costume going forward for some time. That's a real feather in your cap. And he loves Clint so much, so let's make a new costume for Clint and all this kind of stuff. So
yeah, I've heard artists say that they love it when to see other people, pick up the baton after they've made a new one. And I'm sure you're smart enough to say, if you're going to give them new looks, I'm just going to get out of the way. You probably just
yeah, it's awesome. And John did that on Thunderbolts as well. He gave Moonstone a new costume and a couple of things like that. And sometimes he would really like some of these artists, they want to do it immediately. And I'm like, oh, give me a minute and I can work it into the story. Like I'll find a way we can justify it. New team is easy. Everyone's going to have a costume or what may have you. That's all cool. But if you want to evolve it in the story, let's just put it in. Let's burn off the old costume or let's do something where it becomes necessary. All you got to do is tell me what you want to do, as much as possible. That's why it's so important to be constantly communicating with the art team, because I don't just want to drop a script on them. I want them to be pumped. I want them there's stuff in there that they really want to draw. If there's particular villains or there's particular things that they love about these characters, tell me, and I will just turn that up. I'll adjust the knobs and give you the space to do the cool thing you want to do.
Yeah, and like you said, very serendipitous that Sean became available, because here's the thing about it being so dense, especially that first issue, and the fact that, like we're talking about, leaning into the flaws, and Thunderbolts is always going to be a little off kilter. Working with somebody that you're familiar with, you've already have that kind of shorthand. You're not getting, you and Sean aren't getting to know each other here, so you can just focus on telling the best story.
Yeah, exactly. And I can write stuff into a page, and even if I can't see exactly how he's going to draw it, I know he can do it. Like I can look and go, that's crazy, but yeah, that's very doable. There's a way that this is going to fit. One of the hardest things to do is to write a script when you don't have the artist nailed down yet, because you're kind of writing into the void. You're like, I hope this person likes drawing cars or like whatever.
Right.
Hope this is going to work. In my head, this is going to be really epic. And then you get an artist and that's not playing to their strengths in any way, shape, or form. And you're like, oh crap, Yeah. And I have no problem throttling or changing stuff up once I know what someone is capable of. Like that's part of the job, is that communication and collaboration. And so with Sean, it totally feels super comfortable. And the majority of the time, it's just like he's sending roughs in and we're on autopilot. I'm like, yep, awesome. That's right. You got it. And because he knows even my script kind of cadence, like the way I would describe something, or that there's certain precepts I really like, particularly when you're doing dialogue scenes or you're doing humor, where you want to have like little beats and breaths or a pause panel between before someone says a bit of a punchline, or one of those things I love is when you have the same kind of panel, but there's a subtle little change between them as something really tiny happens. And, Sean knows that kind of pacing, like he knows the way I like to structure those things out. So
yeah, that's cool. Fantastic. The other thing that I got to ask you about is, Marvel dropped this announcement that Thunderbolts, and it was kind of, everything was silhouetted. And then the next day, the lineup got announced. That day that the lineup got announced, I saw a lot of people really excited for some of these characters, because they're not ones that, that have their own title. Hawkeye just had the incredible successful TV show. Monica Rambeau's a fan favorite. Who was in WandaVision as well? Yeah, she was in WandaVision. Monica, she was also in the Captain Marvel movie. What was the reaction? Did you have people reaching out? How did you feel like it landed?
Yeah, big time. I mean, that's the nice thing about it. When you announce a Marvel book like this, it's always a cool, kind of explosion of excitement. Your friends all kind of get excited for you in the industry, and then just casual people who just love these characters. And it's so fascinating. It's like, when I was doing Uncanny Avengers, this like real strident fan group of Scarlet Witch fans were like there for it. They're like, oh, Wanda needs to be in more stuff, and she's one of my favorite Avengers. So we would have this dialogue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the Hawkeye fans are just, they're out in droves. Like they were just like, finally, Clint's leading a team. Yes, you know, and Monica, like, why hasn't she been in a book in a while? Or,
Right.
you know, America Chavez, they're just like, yes, 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 let's do this stuff. And that's really fun. But I love things like, so Persuasion's in this book. And it's like, she is, she used to be known as the Purple Girl, and she was on Alpha Flight in the Bill Mantlo run in the late 80s. Like she's obscure in that sense, right? But she's a great character. I needed someone who was in kind of a mentalist kind of a role in the book for very specific reasons. And she's currently in New York, and Kilgrave is in the Devil's Reign event. So there was like a nice bit of tethering that I could do with that as well. And it was funny. I got messages from people like, oh my God, I haven't seen this character in ages. I can't believe, you know, she's like on this team book. And those are fun too. I like being able to surprise people. If it was just, you know, all the ones you expect in that sense, there's a certain amount of people go, yeah, that's the classic team lineup, but it is kind of fun to throw a curveball and to surprise people with who's in the mix. And then sometimes the biggest thing is, well, why? Well, why Persuasion? Well, why Power Man? It's like, read the book and then you're going to see how it all kind of, why these ingredients are in the mix, you know.
See how it comes together. Well, I'm super excited for it as well.
Thanks,
I
man.
mean, you know, I'm always a fan of what you do. Loved your Champions run, and like you said, I mean, you mix action and heart very, very well. So when you said Ted Lasso, like, I'm like, well, of course, that's right. That's you were kind of doing the Ted Lasso thing before Ted Lasso was even.
Well, that's the thing, right? And so as much as it, I mean, it's a nice kind of an elevator pitch to be able to say it's Ted Lasso. But if you read even Black Panther and the Agents of Wakanda, we would have these little emotional moments or these little dips or, you know, interactions of the characters. Champions, we did it all the time.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff I really love to do. I love writing action, but I love putting the heart behind it. Like, why do these people do these things? Or the feet of clay, like what they are messed up and they are trying to figure themselves out. I think on Champions, some of the fans were thrown a little bit sideways on that because Mark Waid wrote the book before I did, and he wrote it as a pretty light, kind of airy book. Like the stuff they were up against was the bad guys were very clearly bad, and these were teenagers, and they were sort of, you know, it was a very fun book and a very colorful book. You know, you have Humberto Ramos drawing these really kind of exaggerated proportions and big stuff, and it looked great. I absolutely love the book, but that wasn't the book that I was going to write, you know. And when Tom Brevoort and I started talking, we were starting to talk almost in like the classic Teen Titans mold of like, you know, big drama, big action. These kids are got to prove that they're worthy of being heroes. And so I kind of put them under the wheels pretty quick. Like I started messing them up. And some of the fans were like, what are you doing? And it's like, you know, these are Marvel heroes. Like they deserve all the drama that Marvel heroes get, for better or for worse. Right. And that's kind of where I feel it should be.
Yeah.
And,
well, the highs aren't going to be high if there aren't some lows to contract.
Right. And you want these characters to earn it, right? Like you want it to feel like they overcame things. And the teen books that I really liked, whether it was New Mutants or Teen Titans or any of these, like they were books where characters were constantly getting, you know, sideswiped by life and drama and relationships and difficulties. And that's why you held on every month, is because something unexpected and cool was happening, and you needed to see what came next. Right. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, Thunderbolts coming in May, so a couple of months. Sean and Jim are hard at work, so looking forward to that. So it's been great chatting with you, Jim, but I can't let you go without talking just a little bit of D&D.
Sure.
You're such a huge D&D guy.
I am.
We've talked before about that's kind of how you learned that you love to tell stories, was by
I would not be a writer today without Dungeons and Dragons. And I joke with people that like when I'm writing now, I feel like I'm just like a dungeon master. Like I'm putting characters into scenarios and then they're figuring their way out of them. That's the way I kind of think about these action beats and storytelling, for sure.
Yeah. So are you writing any Dungeons and Dragons right now?
I am.
There
So
was
the
there was
current
a
miniseries is
yeah
called
the
Mindbreaker. Yeah, that's the current D&D
right
miniseries that's coming out now. And it's just wrapping up. As we're recording this, I think this week, the
issue
fifth
4
issue comes out.
of issue 5.
Five.
Okay, got it,
Yeah,
got it.
yeah. So
Okay,
that's the big climax to Mindbreaker, which is our sixth miniseries of D&D. I don't mind telling you. I can't tell you what's in it, but I can tell you there's a D&D annual coming this summer that hasn't been announced yet, but I've been working away on that as well. So that's going to be an oversized issue with a big kind of crazy story in it. And there's more D&D irons in the fire and other sword and sorcery stuff that I'm working on as well.
gotcha.
So,
Cool. So I mean, it's talk about a tight knit community or people that
oh
show
yeah.
up. You got a big following for your D&D stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's been great.
So that's fantastic. Congrats on that. Anything else that you have? I mean, I know you probably can't say specifically,
Yeah,
but
I've
some
got
other stuff with Marvel or
I did just finished up that I mean it's still being released, but I'm done working on it. They did this Marvel Unlimited digital first series called Life of Wolverine.
mm-hmm,
And so it's sort of a companion digital series alongside X Deaths of Wolverine and X Lives of Wolverine,
mm-hmm.
the Ben Percy event. But what this thing is editor Mark Basso gave me a challenge. Basically, we have this kind of primer on Logan's life. Like if you either know Wolverine but you haven't gotten caught up, or if you don't know Wolverine at all from except for maybe the movies or something, this is like a crash course in Logan's life. And so I had to read hundreds of Wolverine comics and look for through lines of narrative, like what are the most important story beats, why are they there, and how do they all fit together in the current Marvel timeline. And that was a really weird challenge because even as much as I thought I knew Wolverine, there's so many stories and there's
There
so many
are.
flashback stories, like him in World War One and him like in the 1920s running around and on capers and like all these weird things that I hadn't read before.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, but they're being written. Some of these stories were written in the 80s, some in the 90s, some in the 2000s. And some of them jive and a bunch of them are kind of just a little bit out of sync.
Right.
And so my job was to kind of make them all fit and to go, okay, there are all these stories where he doesn't use his claws because at the time they didn't do the bone claws thing. They didn't have that. It was his claws came from, adamantium,
Mm-hmm.
like in the classic Weapon X story by Barry Windsor Smith. But there's a reason for it, and so we're literally figuring this stuff out kind of retroactively and creating these big sweeping feelings of narrative about Wolverine, like what defines him. And in some ways, I kind of had to laugh because I was reading some of these stories and there's certain tropes about Logan that a lot of writers keep using, like they'll introduce a new female character and in the past or whatever, and he'll spend time with them. And obviously they don't survive by the end because
Right.
otherwise she'd be around now.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this happen 5, 6, 7 times and you're like, okay, this is ridiculous. But also it becomes this narrative of tragedy. Like you get close to him, you die. Like that becomes the big picture kind of narrative that we can generate, that his life is this series of, control or loss of control, when he's the beast or when he's the man or when he's in love or when he's got loss. And so we started to take, in some ways, almost the ridiculous repetition and turn that into the story itself, that the curse of what it is to be Logan and to live this extended life and to try and figure out who you are and what you're meant to be. And it's not until he gets to the X-Men that he gets any kind of stability.
Mm-hmm.
And the found family that he has, with the children of the Atom, that becomes its own sort of narrative point. And so I was joking with Mark Basso that I'm like, well, now I'm your Wolverine expert, like whether I ever intended to be, way more about this damn character than I ever anticipated. So it was fun. It was a kind of a neat project and really pushed a very different kind of writing mode for me, like tons and tons of research, and then trying to read the tea leaves of what it all means and make a story that I felt like made sense, but also, worked with the evidence that I had before me. So,
I always thought Daredevil was the worst guy to date in the Marvel universe, but maybe it's Wolverine.
yeah, it's wild, man. These tragic characters, the soap operas,
Yeah.
and because these characters have been around for decades and they've been in hundreds, if not thousands, of issues. The microcosm of it. You're reading the immediate stories, and you're encompassed in the immediate drama, and that's kind of the point of the thing. And then you take this 100-foot view, and you're looking down, and you go, "How many times have they done this?
Yeah.
How many Christmases has Peter Parker, been through, or whatever? It doesn't matter. That's not the point. Like it's the ongoing tale of the Marvel saga, right? And that's all.
Well, yeah. I just had Jerry Conway on a few weeks ago.
Sweet.
And he was talking about, it's that you got to give him the illusion of change. That's what Stan used to always say.
But the other thing too is that I think what's amazing is when you're able to, you see these real seminal stories that come around that do become permanent change. Like if you'd have told me as a kid that Bucky Barnes would come back,
right,
and it would be one of the best Captain America stories of all time, you're like, no, right? Like, and yet now it's a seminal part of the history of that character. And so sometimes taking those big swings and making those unexpected changes can be some of the most fun and stories that you can put together, rather than just trying to trap the character in amber. Right. And as much as the readers say they want a character to be in a particular mold, the reality is if you keep them there too long, they grow bored, right? If the love story is pure and okay, everything works out all right and they're perfect together, you're like, well, where's the drama? What do we do now? Like, how do we tune this up? So
yeah, it goes back to what we were saying before about you need some lows to contrast against the highs, otherwise. And
that's one of those things that I think some of the fans, totally understandably, and I've been on that side of it as well, they'll see something bad happening to their favorite character and they're like, oh my God, again? Or like, why are you being so mean, to fill in the blank? And it's like, I know it sounds crazy, but I do it because I love them. Like if you'll know if I don't like a character, if I don't give them anything to do in an issue. If I just sideline them and I throw them into the background, that's because I don't give a damn about them. Like they've got, they're filling some box. I got to have them in there. But if I like a character, man, I will make their life hard, because that's where the drama comes in, right? That's where the fun comes in.
Yeah. That's where you get to show they're a hero by overcoming it and have that gratification. So
totally.
Anyway, like I said, Jim, really excited for Thunderbolts. Can't wait.
Thanks, man.
Can't wait to see Sean's gorgeous art, new characters, and all that. So again, everybody, dropping in May. I'm sure we'll be reviewing it on the podcast. So just keep your ears open. Jim, if anybody wants to follow you online, I know you like engaging and whatnot. Where's the best place to find you?
The hub for everything is just jimzub.com. So JIMZUB.com. That's got links to my Facebook, my Instagram, and my Twitter and all that kind of stuff. It's got interviews and reviews. I've also got a bunch of blog posts on there that are like tutorials, how to write comics, how to write a pitch, what it's like working in the industry and stuff like that. If people want a deeper dive, I've got a Patreon where for like the price of a coffee, you can dig through my archives of scripts. I've got 270 scripts on there now,
wow.
Plus pitches and feedback notes and lettering proofs and all kinds of things like that. So if you want to deep dive into the working process of being a writer in comics, that's one of the easiest and best ways to kind of see what it actually looks like, not just someone, theorizing, but or talking about, but looking at actual drafts of scripts and then comparing it to the printed version and going, oh, okay, I see how that was adapted, or how, Jim's communicating to the artist and getting those particular results. So, yeah,
that's a great resource, because I see artists all the time too asking, hey, where can I find a script where I can,
big time,
do some sequentials that I can show off at cons and stuff. And speaking of cons, any appearances? You have any appearances planned yet for this year?
Nothing announced yet. So things are finally turning the corner on that after like 2 years of kind of hibernation. So I actually do have a few shows in the mix that we're just finalizing plans on now. And until the contracts get signed or whatever and announcements get made, I can't say. But for the first time in a while, I'm going to be poking my head out and doing some shows, which I'm really, really excited about. So it's no surprise I'll be, at the Toronto Fan Expo at the end of the summer. I'm going to be at TCAF, which is the Toronto Comic Arts Festival, because those are both my local, shows.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond those, I've got a couple other appearances in Canada, and we're just kind of starting to look at some American dates as well. So yeah, it's kind of this hopeful spring is coming, and all of us are kind of looking forward to, I think, getting back out there. I'm not going to go as full bore as I did, 2019. 2020 right. was originally supposed to be one of my busiest travel years ever, and obviously that all scuttled. But yeah, we're kind of dipping our toe in the water and excited to go for a dip.
Yeah, same, but trying to do it, safely. So hopefully, right? I'm sure I'll run into you at a show at some time, if not this year, then next.
That'd be great.
But again, thanks so much for joining us. Everybody, I'll put a link to Jim's website as well as his Patreon in the show notes, so you can just go click there and find it. I highly encourage you guys to follow him, go check out the scripts, check out his website. There's a lot of really great resources there. So one more time, I'll say thanks, Jim. It's been great catching up. And to all you listeners, we really appreciate you joining us. We wouldn't do it if you weren't there to listen. So that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.